Italy, can we just chill with the single-seater racing, please? If we thought Monza was full of drama, Mugello definitely served up a race and a half as well. Something just to note though before we go into a few more details. Obviously there was a period of time prior to Stroll going off towards the end of the race that really wasn't that interesting. I don't know, that kind of to me showed up a few of the weaknesses of the track maybe, but we're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about the race, we're going to talk about the potential for Mugello coming back, and we're also going to talk about the rest of the season moving forwards. I kind of predicted that we would have a turn 1 or at least a lap 1 incident just because of the way the junior series have been racing through that corner. It's a very wide turn 1. Actually the best line through turn 1 is outside because there's a chicane, 2-3 chicane is so close coming up next. If you're on the outside of T1, you're perfectly placed for T2-3. So actually the best line is the outside line, which I think is the one that Bottas ran. Definitely Leclerc ran it, which is why he got such a good start. And I think Sainz ran it too. Obviously off the start, carnage ensued. It was a real shame for Sainz because the contact between him and I do believe it was Stroll, but one of the racing points is quite difficult to tell. They never really showed on the TV which one it was. But that contact was so light and so gentle. It just goes to show how on rails that car was. And I think if you watch Sainz throughout the entire weekend, he did seem to be struggling a little bit with the handling. So it might have been that the McLaren for him was set up very, very light, that such a small brush did in fact spin him round. Very unlucky for Vettel to get tangled in that as well. Just wrong place, wrong time, but that is unfortunately what happens when you do start the race at the back of the grid. The Gasly, Verstappen, Raikkonen, Grosjean incident, I think it was Grosjean, is a really, really strange one, and we had something very similar in an F2 race. So that was just really unlucky, especially for Verstappen. Super unlucky. The issue he had off the start obviously hindered him and saw him drop down the field after what was a very good start, and arguably could have been said that had the power not been lost in his car, he would have got past Hamilton by turn 1 like Bottas did. So real shame for him, but with the issues they had on the grid as well at the start, just think his race was plagued from the get-go. So you know, not really sure much more to go on that, but very, very unlucky for him. And obviously very unlucky for Gasly. But again, starting that far down the grid, that is the danger zone, especially especially on a track like Mugello, which is very twisty, very turny, kind of tight, and people are looking for opportunistic overtaking. Speaking of overtaking, to briefly take a side note from going through the race, I'm not sure that this track is actually that easy to overtake on. Most of the overtakes in the Formula 1 race were done down the main straight using the toe and DRS into T1. And it just was a little bit boring in terms of overtakes. If you look at like F2 and F3, we had overtakes going everywhere. Drivers were trying different moves through the different corners, and some of them were working and some of them weren't. And yes, the F1 drivers very, very much do watch the feature races, especially on a track like Mugello that's brand new to them that they don't know. So they'll very likely have been seeing that and watching those moves and seeing which ones worked and seeing which ones didn't. But it just felt like most of the overtakes were done down the main straight using DRS, which was a bit of a snooze fest. Herein lies quite a big discussion point, because the difference with Mugello versus pretty much any other circuit on the F1 grid is that the entry to the pit lane is in a different place. So the entry to the pit lane normally is somewhere on the final corner, at the exit of the final corner, which means that the safety car has somewhere to go going into the pit lane before they get onto the main straight. Now with Mugello, the entry to the pit lane is after the exit, whilst you're at the start of the first straight, at the main straight, sorry. At the start of the main straight, that is where the pit lane entry is, which means that drivers, I mean, we saw drivers diving very late into the pits anyway, throughout the weekend, throughout the race, throughout the series, because of the placement of the pit entry. But the problem with that is normally the safety car line, which is the line in which at the point where the drivers can then overtake after a safety car period, until that line you can't overtake because the safety car is peeled away normally into the pits, and usually those safety car lines are at the exit of the final corner because the safety car is already clear of the track, so it can be, and that's why you normally see everyone racing out of the last corner. They'll normally slow up on the entry to the last corner, the safety car will go ahead, and the front running car, which at the time is Bottas, takes control of the pace and can then determine when the grid can get going. If he doesn't get going by that safety car line, he is then in a position to be overtaken. So because of the layout of Mugello, and the safety car couldn't leave the track until after the final corner, the safety car line had to be further down the track. Ergo, for this track, it was on the start-finish line. That became our safety car line, which means that Bottas, well within his rights, can hold up the grid until he reaches that line. Now, what I think happened was a combination of inexperience from the drivers and of the track, because what happened was some of the midfield went out of the last corner, started accelerating, and then had to brake again because they realized the rest of the grid hadn't gone. My assumption is when you're in a safety car period, I've never been in one, obviously, so this is all just assumption and what I believe I would do in that situation, but I would think that if you're in a safety car train, you are going to be watching the guy ahead of you, because when he goes, you go, and you know you can't go until he's gone. So if that's the case, and some of the midfield did go early, then the rest of the guys behind them thought they were racing and went as well. And that's why we had what we had happened. Because some of the midfield went and broke, and then it's like a concertina effect. So Bottas is very much not at fault. He did everything he could. He was well within his rights to hold the pack as long as he did, and to do what he did and not go until he did. What I think happened was somebody, don't know who, but somebody in the backfield, maybe more than one driver in the backfield, did kind of realize that, thought they were going to go at the exit of the last corner like they normally do, and then realized the grid hadn't gone. So obviously that brought out our first red flag of the day, and I do say first because there were multiple. The first red flag came out too early for anyone to optimize on the free pit stop, like Stroll did at Monza, because they were only 9 laps in and they still had about 50 odd to go. So not even the hard tyres, which were predicted a life of 35 laps, were going to make it that far. But obviously Ferrari tried it with Leclerc, and those tyres faded very quickly. I think he ended up doing 4 stops in the end, but obviously 2 of those were under red flag, so net 2. But still, that was one of the things that hampered his race. But we'll get onto Ferrari in a minute. Restart obviously paid off better for Hamilton than Bottas the second time around, leading everyone to believe that the best side to start on was I guess the dirty side of the grid. Yeah. Which is interesting, but I don't even think that was the case. I just think that Bottas had a great start the first time, Hamilton didn't, and then Hamilton had a great start the next 2 times. I don't think it really had anything to do with track position. Obviously, starting from P2 and the dirty side of the grid, you are on the outside line for the first corner, which, as I said earlier, is the better line to be on, in my personal opinion. So maybe there's a small advantage, but I just think that Hamilton had the edge. Let's talk about Mercedes and the pit stops, shall we? Bottas requested that he wanted to race Hamilton, so whatever tyres they put Hamilton on, they put him on an opposite tyre. So if he put the softs on, Bottas wanted to put the mediums on, and vice versa, because he wanted to have a different strategy to Hamilton, knowing that pace for pace on the same strat, he couldn't pass that car, and he wouldn't be able to catch up to him and pass him. So Bottas requested that, and then 3 laps later told Mercedes that his tyres were absolutely screwed, and in my opinion gave them the out they needed to not have to worry about that. Because normally, and it is normal, if you have 2 cars on track, the front running car of your team comes into the pits first. They get first option on the tyres, first choice, because they are leading ahead of the car behind them. They are leading your team, so they get the first choice, the first option. That's what Bottas was banking on, because Hamilton should have pitted before him, meaning that they would have said, okay, Valtteri, Hamilton's gone into the softs, and Bottas would have gone, awesome, I'll take the mediums then, please. I don't want to be on the same tyre as him. Because he told them that his tyres were absolutely dead, for want of a better word, they were then like, oh, yeah, come in now. If you come in now, then we'll sort that out for you. And thus, he gave up the chance to be able to switch options or switch strategies to Hamilton, which then saw the 2 of them going around the track on the same tyres, because once Bottas had pitted first, he then in sequence had to always pit first. Bottas seemed very early in that race to be ready to take the fight to Hamilton and ready to do what he had to do and do those sneaky manoeuvres and push the car past what it was meant to do and really give us a race, and then didn't. I don't know, it just felt like a little bit of a disappointment, especially at the end when we had the 12 laps running. They were both on the same tyres, you know, they started very close together, and then Hamilton ran 5 seconds down the road, and then Bottas managed to close it up by 1.61 lap, and then because he was getting pressure behind from Albon, and then it just drifted apart again. And yeah, I don't know, I just kind of wanted him to kind of go, I'm not listening to you, team. I want to win this race. I've got 12 laps and a fresh set of tires. I'm gonna just try it. I've got to go for it. And even if he hadn't made it work, I at least wanted to see him go for it, which I don't think we did. Then after the first red flag, we did go through this very long lull, at which point I checked out from the race. And the only thing that was interesting through that lull is the fact that Ricciardo was in line for his first podium with Renault, and that would have been interesting and exciting, and that was something to keep an eye on to see if he was maintaining that. But even that battle wasn't in any form of danger because he was so far ahead of the rest of the grid. And in all honesty, a safety car was needed to liven up the end of that race. So still don't really know what happened to Stroll. When it first happened, I was convinced that it would be fatigue. Driver fatigue, which is something I did expect to start seeing towards the end of the race, because not only is it a brand new circuit, but it's a very, very demanding circuit. We've had a lot of the drivers complaining about neck ache, a lot of the drivers wearing sports tape on their necks because of neck ache. So it is a very demanding and a very tiring circuit for the drivers. So I wouldn't have been surprised if Stroll's incident had just been a small driver mistake that ended up in a big incident. Turns out there was either a punch out or something came off the car or some kind of failure. At the time of recording, we don't know what really happened to that. And I don't think we'll really know what happened until maybe Russia, the next race. Maybe they'll talk about it, maybe they'll say something, but I don't entirely know if they will. So maybe we'll never know. But yeah, that was needed to spice up the race. Not sure we really wanted another red flag, but we definitely needed something to bring the grid back together, because like I said, even Ricciardo in third had a lovely buffer to whomever was in fourth, and didn't really have a lot of pressure coming onto him. So had there not have been that red flag, I do think he'd have got the podium. Second restart comes out, and then you know the rest is kind of history. The only thing to note that really came from the end of the race was Alex Albon coming through the field and finally getting his first Formula One podium, which I think's done wonders for him. Not only his confidence, but his assertion in the team. That might not be a word, but we'll go with it. Kind of showing them that, you know, I've had a bit of a slump, but I can still do what you want me to do, and I can still be here running at the front. The biggest thing for Albon is to try and sort out his Saturday. It's his qualifying performance, because it is lacking and it is something that's hindering him in the race. I mean, it's the same with Ferrari, it's the same with any other team, but obviously the higher up the grid you start, the better chance you have, and the less chance you are of being in the danger zone. In terms of who then ends up in Red Bull next year, I genuinely think that's quite open. Obviously results like this, if Albon can keep repeating them, or at least be P4 more consistently throughout the latter side of the championship, then definitely this is going to help him, and he'll definitely retain that seat. I think for Red Bull, they're in a prime opportunity to be able to weigh up their options. I think they're confident that they'll keep the two drivers in either team. I think in terms of Helmut Marko's position and not wanting to look like he's got egg on his face, he'd much prefer Albon to start showing performance, because then he can very easily not have to re-promote Gasly. Well, we'll see what happens with Red Bull. I still think that's quite up in the air, and it will be very dependent on the results for the rest of the season, but I do think for sure Albon and Gasly will be in Red Bull seats of some description next year, whether that be where they are or reversed. Ricciardo did very, very well. It was a bit of a shame to not see him on the podium, because that would have been good, but also I'm kind of glad Albon did get the podium, because I do think he really did need it, and there's been a couple of times where he should have got podiums in the past and didn't, so it was very deserving of Albon. But it would have been good to see Ricciardo on the podium, just, you know, to kind of re-show his worth, because his worth as a driver has been a little bit lackluster of recent, kind of since he's gone to Renault. I feel like he knows he can't really do what he wants to do in that car. He can't fight for podiums, he can't fight for race wins normally. In a normal race, he's not, there's too many cars that would prevent him from doing so. So I kind of feel like that's showing a little bit in his driving, and that he's being a little bit more jokey and comedic and a little bit more Hollywood, bit dramatic is kind of the way I see it. Obviously opinions on my own, feel free to disagree. So I'm kind of looking forward to him going to McLaren next year, because I think at least he knows it's a strong car, it's a strong team, he's got better footing there, and I do think he'll do really well there, because next year, remember, McLaren will also be running Mercedes Mercedes engines. So they're gonna be a real strong contender. They really could suddenly bring the fight, not only up the front, but to Mercedes. So fingers tightly crossed for that, because we definitely need that back in the sport. Racing Point did well. Obviously a shame about Stroll, because I think they could have had a good double points finish. Perez didn't really seem to do much this weekend, and I don't know obviously if that comes off the back of he's just lost his seat at Racing Point / Aston Martin for next year to Sebastian Vettel, who goes over there for next year. I'm going to do a whole video a little bit later in the season about 2020 lineups and kind of talk about the remaining seats we have and who might go where and who potentially might fall off the grid. So keep an eye for that. Once it's up, it will be linked up here in a card. But yeah, I don't know if that kind of affected his racing a little bit. He's apparently in talks with Haas. But honestly, unless he goes to Haas, I don't really see any seats there for him, because I think for Alfa Romeo, there was an interview done with Raikkonen this weekend, and I think that kind of showed he hasn't lost his passion for Formula One yet, or racing Formula One yet. So I do think Raikkonen will re-sign again next year in Alfa, and they're very keen to bring one of those young guys up. There's going to be a whole video on that, don't worry, very soon. Obviously, Racing Point / Aston Martin is now wrapped up. Won't be going to Toro Rosso or Red Bull, because that's just not how they do. And I do honestly think that would be a mistake for Red Bull. Lando Norris did a good job. Like I said, very unfortunate for Carlos Sainz to be knocked out so early, because he did have a very good start and put himself in a very strong position, but unfortunately got tagged going through that first chicane and then taken out in the restart. So very much a shame for him. Norris had a good race. I don't think it was a strongish track for McLaren. They did seem to be struggling with pace throughout the practice sessions and qualifying and stuff. So I think his 6th place is more of a result of circumstance rather than raw pace and raw performance, but still a good job from him. Kvyat also did very well, considering I think if he doesn't know, he should probably know that he probably doesn't have a seat next year. I think Red Bull are definitely looking to get him out of the way and bring up either someone young or someone different. Not quite sure what they're going for there, but I will be surprised to see Kvyat in the AlphaTauri next year. But it was a good job from him, fairly consistent, kept his nose clean, kept out of trouble, so good points haul in for him, for the team. I'm going to jump over Leclerc because I want to talk about Ferrari in a moment. So Raikkonen did pretty well, being involved in that first incident, and then I think he also got a bit tangled up in the second one as well. So did very well to recover, and also got that 5-second time penalty for entering the pit lane late. So he did a really good job from him to put the gap between him and Leclerc to really make sure that it was damage limitation to its max, and he only ended up losing 1 place when he easily could have lost 3. Speaking of losing places, such a shame for Russell. He did an absolutely stellar job. And I've heard since the final restart, because Raikkonen and Grosjean were released so they could go around to catch up the lap that they had lost on the field, they basically started the race with warmer tyres than everybody else. And apparently Russell really struggled with that off the start, and that's why he didn't have a bad start, but that's why he had a worse start than those behind him, because his tyres were cooler and they got off the line better. So a real shame for him to miss out on that point, especially because he drove a very consistent, very strong race, and the pace of that car was pretty good. I do believe the pace was better than the Ferrari, which, wow. Grosjean comes home 12th, only 12 finishes. You know, we know the Haas is not performing very well this year. Kind of just, I guess he was hoping that a couple more people would go out, and that would have really helped him get a few points, but alas is the situation. Ferrari on their 1000th Grand Prix. I don't think anybody thought it would be great for them, especially Ferrari. It's a real shame, because Leclerc gave some kind of false hope off the start with his great start and getting up to P3 and looking like they might have some kind of pace to challenge, but from there just fell like a rock, because the straight line speed on that Ferrari is bad, and they were being overtaken very easily through the DRS, and that was what was hindering them. As soon as the car behind them got DRS, they were a sitting duck and couldn't do anything to defend. But a double points finish nonetheless, but once again, I do believe that's more of a situation of circumstance rather than actual good performance. Not quite the 1000th Grand Prix they would have been after, but at least both cars finished and both cars scored points, and that is something they haven't been able to say for a while. So guess that's good, but they still really need to sort that out, because it's got to be better for next year, or it's going to be really painful. And I don't think it's good for the sport to have Ferrari on the back leg and struggling this badly either. As much as one team doesn't determine the success or failure of Formula One, Ferrari is a very pinnacle linchpin to Formula One. Normally, if you say Formula One, people think of a red car. They've been in it since the start. They're the only team to have been in it pretty much since the start. They have a lot of heritage. They are currently the most successful team in the sport and will likely be moving forward just because of the longevity they have in the sport. Ferrari will come back. They will rise back to the top because it is what the team does. They go through slumps. Between Schumacher winning his first championship with them, they had about 21 years to wait for that to come back. So it will get better again for Ferrari, but I think if they start shifting around their team now, they can really speed up that process. Mugello itself is a little bit of a conundrum. I think for the drivers, it was very challenging, so there's that, but it was also a very enjoyable track because for them it was challenging, it was different, it was, you know, something new, something they hadn't done before. I think the drivers enjoyed it a lot from what they've all been saying. Spectator-wise, the race wasn't that bad, but arguably the 20 laps we had when nothing happened were quite boring, and like I said earlier, I checked out. A racetrack that's in need of drama to be exciting is not a good racetrack in my mind. It's one of the reasons I don't really like Monaco. On the flip of that, it is a tight, twisty circuit, which does kind of entice incidents and someone trying to go up the inside and absolutely not quite getting it right. Do I think it should come back on the calendar? I don't know if I do or don't. I think there's pros and cons to both sides of it, but I don't think the crashes will help its ability to come back on. And I mean, the red flag periods themselves weren't too long. I think we only lost about 25 minutes in total over both red flags. So I don't think clear up, but there was some situations where, like, accessibility to corners, for example, there was an F2 race that was under VSC and then had to go to full safety car because they had to get a track car on the track to get to the thing, and obviously once you do that you have to put the track under safety car period. That's why they did that. So accessibility may be a little bit of a questioning point. And the other thing is, it's a very historic track, and it's one of the reasons I hope Formula One never goes back to Brands Hatch, because Brands Hatch is as it was 50 years ago. And I think if you look at it, Mugello is as it was 50 years ago, and I'd hate for them to add in like runoffs and extra gravel traps and all this, that and the other, or smaller than the gravel traps, because the gravel traps, basically once you're in them, you can't get out of them pretty much. And I'd hate for them to alter the track in that way to make it less old school and more modern. One other thing that really irritated me is the track limits. They were basically saying that the drivers may use all of the curve and the runoff until they hit the gravel, which is stupid in my mind. There are white lines on the track and part of it's painted grey and the other parts are not, for a very specific reason, because that is the track. If you're gonna widen it, just paint it grey. It really irritated me. So many moves were done using, especially on the run towards, I want to say towards 2-3, there was a bit of curbing there as you come out of there, especially using the outside line coming through turn 1. There was a green bit of curb that so many drivers used to make overtakes. Which in my mind, I'm like, sorry lads, that's just not the track. If you're gonna race on a circuit that's got these lines painted, don't just ignore them. Make it more difficult for the drivers. Force them to be tighter on their lines. Because otherwise it's just super easy. Like T14, for example, I'm glad they did that, because otherwise it wasn't a chicane. It was a left-hander with a straight, because you could really straighten out that the second part of that chicane and just make it a left-hand kink, really, rather than the chicane it was supposed to be. So I am glad they did that, but I'm annoyed they didn't do that with more of the circuit. So we got a couple of weeks now until Sochi. It's going to be interesting because Sochi is going to have a lot more fans. It was actually really good to see the fans there at Mugello this weekend. I don't think they did a bad job. I didn't hear that they'd done a bad job. It looked pretty good. The only thing that annoyed me was there was no television coverage of the Mick Schumacher driving his dad's 2004 car around, which I don't know, I was quite excited to see, so thanks for that. But I think spectator-wise, I think they did a good job. Obviously, I wasn't there, so I can't really tell. If you did go, please let me know how it was, how the social distancing and things worked, if you felt comfortable, if you didn't feel comfortable, what kind of guidance they gave you, because that would be really great and really interesting to know. One last thing before I end, I do just have to mention that yesterday, I think it was, Lewis Hamilton was given a reprimand for wearing his Brenoa Taylor t-shirt on the podium. Apologies if I have said that wrong. This is the most ridiculous thing. It completely screams in the face of everything they've been saying. Hamilton was not making a political stance. Hamilton was not doing anything wrong using his platform to bring awareness to something that should be made aware of. And the fact that it's pretty much made a load of old white men uncomfortable is absolutely fantastic. I couldn't commend him more. That's kind of what we're trying to do here. We're trying to show and bring awareness. And, you know, if you have a platform like this, absolutely scream about it and utilize that platform and use it in any way you can to bring awareness, because these campaigns don't just disappear because people stop doing the hashtag. There's a reason it's always here on the whiteboard, because it never disappears. It's not going anywhere, and I want it to constantly be reminded in everything I'm doing. That's why it's here. That's why it never goes away. So I think it's absolutely appalling that Formula One have given him this reprimand. I think it's disgusting and flies in the face of everything they've been doing, because quite frankly their end racism campaign is great, but people have stopped taking notice of it, and it's just a thing that happens now. This made an impact, so much so we're seeing it and something has happened. And I don't think he should have been reprimanded. I think he should have been commended for doing it and supported for doing it, and they should have shown support. I also think that being someone like Lewis Hamilton, a reprimand, aka a slap on the wrist, is gonna make him go, all right, cool. I'm very likely to do it again. And good on him. I think he should. If that's what he wants to do and that's the way he wants to utilize his platform, I think that is correct, and that is how he should be handling it. But that's it. That's my thoughts on the Tuscan Grand Prix and everything that unfolded over that weekend. Please let me know of your thoughts, comments, everything, opinions on everything I've said. Let me know down in the comment section below, and I will definitely get back to you, because I love discussing this, as I always say, and I really enjoy hearing your thoughts, and sometimes your thoughts make me think differently about things I've said in the video. But anyway, thank you so much for hanging out with me today. It's been an absolute blast as always. If you enjoyed this video, go show that like button some good old-fashioned love, and if you want to support the channel, go hit subscribe and ring that bell so you don't miss next time I upload a video. Stay awesome, and I will see you all in the next video! Oh gosh, there's so much to talk about.